The Civil War had resolved the issue of slavery and made these United States into the United States, one nation, indivisible. But the outcome of the Civil War created as many new questions as it resolved old ones.
Yes, slaves were free. All people were free in the United States. But what would be the place of blacks in the South? Would they, in fact, be equal to whites? And who would assure that equality?
It is one of those periods in American history in which America appears to be about ready to live up to its principles, in which they are going to make it possible for people to join the society on an equal basis. It is also a time during which black Americans become involved in the political system in the South particularly, where previously they had been excluded, and where with allies they were able to have a significant impact on shaping the society in these years. This is a period of hope.
To ensure that blacks would never be returned to slavery and to free slaves in areas not covered by the Emancipation Proclamation, Congress initiated the 13th Amendment to the Constitution.
Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
When both Kentucky and Delaware rejected ratification of the 13th Amendment, its passage was endangered. President Andrew Johnson then made ratification a condition for the readmission of Southern states to the Union. It was the first step in what would later be called the Constitutional Revolution of Reconstruction.
Verily, the work does not end with the abolition of slavery, but only begins.
Hallelujah! Oh, hallelujah!
When slavery ended, former slaves were legally free. But what did freedom actually mean for them?
It's articulated in a number of ways. One, obviously, you're no longer going to be a slave. Two, if you're a former slave, the right to decide what your family is going to look like, because after all, the separations of families is one of the fundamental problems of slavery.
I think they expressed the freedom in every way they could, and they enjoyed freedom in the fullest sense of the word. So, for example, it might be how they chose to dress, something that they've been prevented from doing in slavery. Mobility, choosing to move about as they saw fit, visiting relatives who had been separated by slavery, visiting loved ones that had somehow been separated during the Civil War.
Freedom meant the right to reap the fruits of one's own labor. With freedom also came the right to legally marry, to form separate churches, and to get an education. When the Civil War ended, 97% of freed slaves were illiterate. Many white Northerners went to the South after the war to assist in the process of Reconstruction or to profit from it. Many of them worked for the Freedmen's Bureau.
Primarily, the Bureau became known as the first kind of welfare agency of the federal government, actually, an agency that dealt with the condition of the freedmen. And schooling, labor, land, all were things that the freedmen had to encounter, and the federal government was there to facilitate their dealing with those problems.
The Freedmen's Bureau was often caught between the high expectations of blacks and the resentment of Southern whites. While most Southern whites were hostile to its mission to educate and empower blacks, many blacks felt that the North wasn't doing enough to help former slaves get a decent start. Land, they believed, was the key to their future, and they hoped the government would help them acquire it.
It's assumed that some of that would be redistributed, and the land that had been left by the planters when they abandoned their fields and the properties, that those would be probably distributable.
Sherman made a famous statement about 40 acres and a mule in general order after he left Savannah, and this rumor got among all the freedmen that they were going to be given 40 acres and a mule. Well, actually, that did not occur.
It didn't happen because the federal government realized that if the land was redistributed, that would keep things very much in turmoil for a while. And the president wanted to restore order very quickly, and he moved very quickly to restore those lands.
The argument was the society has no obligation to the slave outside of simply giving him his right to be a free individual.
No land, no house, not so much as a place to lay our head. Despised by the world, hated by the country that gives us birth, denied all of our rights as a people. Oh, we were friends on the march, brothers on the battlefield. But in the peaceful pursuits of life, it seems that we are strangers.
Former slaves were not the only ones suffering in the South after the war. Thousands of soldiers returned from the war wounded and maimed. In 1865, the state of Mississippi spent 20% of its revenue on artificial limbs.
We are discouraged. We have nothing left to begin anew with. I never did a day's work in my life, and I don't know how to begin.
You have a problem about the loss of capital. You have an infrastructure that has been, in large parts of the South, destroyed. Courthouses, bridges, railroad tracks, matters of that kind.
The banking institutions, financial institutions of the South were obviously destroyed by the Civil War because during the Confederacy, the institutions had relied upon Confederate currency, what have you. All of that was worthless now.
The Southern economy obviously was in poor shape, but it's an agricultural economy, and as long as you can get the crops planted in the field and so on as quickly as possible, then there is, recuperation is not far distant.
To get the crops planted, white landowners needed the former slaves to go back to work. To accomplish this, a new labor relationship had to be created.
There was no cash around, so they couldn't be paid wages, so there would be commitments in terms of parts of the crop. And so that the basis of a sharecropping system was established right away. There was no other currency, there's no liquidity, so part of the harvest was what was bargained for, and then tools and so on were supplied as well. And so the sharecropping system came out of a very ad hoc situation.
With no property of their own, and often working the land of their former owners, life under early Reconstruction didn't appear all that different from slavery to most blacks. Some states passed laws specifically designed to restrict the freedom of African Americans. These laws, known as the Black Codes, prohibited ex-slaves from owning guns or knives, from traveling without a pass, from serving on juries or giving testimony against whites. One law in particular seemed hardly distinguishable from slavery itself. It made it illegal for blacks to be unemployed.
Teach the Negro that if he goes to work, keeps his place, and behaves himself, he will be protected by our white laws. If not, this southern road will be a hard one to travel, for the whites must and shall rule to the end of time.
What is freedom? Is it the bare privilege of not being chained? If this is all, then freedom is a bitter mockery, a cruel delusion.
The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, but it did nothing to guarantee the rights of citizenship to African Americans. In order to establish these rights and in the process overturn the Dred Scott decision, Congress and the states adopted the 14th Amendment.
All persons born or naturalized in the United States are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws.
The constitutional revolution of Reconstruction continued as radical Republicans put in place safeguards that are still interpreted and applied today. Two years after the Civil War ended, Congress passed the Reconstruction Act of 1867.
The two crucial parts of the Reconstruction Act are, one, that universal suffrage was provided, and that meant including all free blacks, male adults, and also that new governments would be set up and new constitutions passed and ratified, and the result of all that was new governments and a Republican Party in the South based on black votes.
The reputation of radical Reconstruction is exactly that it was a fanatical group of Yankee diehards who were so anti-Southern that they would do anything to destroy the country itself and the white people in particular. But by and large, that was not the case. Most Republicans were, by our standards, rather strong on states' rights.
For the times, universal suffrage, that's pretty radical. And the suffrage was being exercised by people who'd just been slaves only a few years before. That is very radical.
We are not prepared for this suffrage, but we can learn. Give a man tools and let him commence to use them, and in time he will learn a trade. So it is with voting.
Voter registration under the new Reconstruction Act began in the summer of 1867. By the fall of that year, more than 700,000 black men in the South had registered to vote, exceeding white voters by about 40,000. This was due in part to political groups known as Union Leagues.
What they did was they tried to further the success of the Republican Party, and so they played a role in the electoral mobilization of that black vote that had just been created by the Reconstruction Act.
Union Leagues were not the only organizations that promoted black political participation.
Many of the black Republican politicians were church leaders. Some of them were reverends, and this was a place where preparing people for voting and elections could be done.
African American political leaders of the period were most often Northern blacks who had come South after the war, Southern blacks who had been free before the war, or black ministers. But some, like Beverly Nash, James Sims, and Prince Rivers, were former slaves. Rivers was a former